You came running. I hadn't slept. Break the silence. Talk to me. Under covers. Under the ground.
All right. This is kind of a test. This the stream right here. I got a new Wi-Fi adapter. All right. Good song. I like Hyde a lot. There's a really good remix of this with Umru that I think is excellent. It's the first Hyde I heard. So always a little bit partial to it. Okay, I think I'm going to go through sorry, I'm looking at nail polish emails. Yeah, man, ILMP makes such great nail polish. I am going to do a Trent video, I think. Just a short one, hopefully. And as always, I will give Trent the appropriate credits. The man has multiple masters. He's a professional apologist. You know, he seems to be a thoughtful guy who tries to be fair in the way he deals with other, well, I'm not going to say other scholars, the way he deals with scholars and other apologists who he disagrees with. Not sure what I will pick. I've watched part of this New Evidence from Jesus video. It's not really interesting to me. Like, I've been clear about this over the time I've been streaming, but like, I'm an agnostic. You know, I don't believe that there's supernatural anything. But that doesn't mean that Jesus wasn't a real guy. And so I don't care if there's proof. Like, I think I said this the last time I was looking at that, but you could give me his birth certificate, and I would say, I believe, great. I already believed that he was a historical figure. You know, you give me Alexander the Great's birth certificate, I'd say the same thing. I already believed he was a historical figure. Much like I do not believe that Alexander was literally descended from Hercules, I don't believe Jesus was literally descended from God. And a birth certificate does not make that any more or less true, right? It doesn't make me right, because it is like, well, he was a historical guy, and it says that this historical guy was half God, well, fully God, fully man. Look, you know, I get it. But so there's proof that that guy is real. So why couldn't the rest of it be real? It's like, I guess it could, right? That's the whole point about being an agnostic. Could be. I don't see a good evidence that it is. I don't care too much about interchurch drama if I can avoid it. Like, I don't want to hear Trent tone police for 15 minutes about how this is blah blah blah. It's whatever. Doing his little, I'm a progressive apologist because I think women should be allowed to vote. Okay. Well, this is going to be interesting. This should be fun. I know a fun thing that he probably isn't going to mention. But I'll bring it up, don't worry.
On Christmas, I took my family to see David, a new film from Angel Studios that follows the life of the patriarch David from humble shepherd to king of Israel. And it's
David, who may or may not be a real historical figure. We'll just I'll mark that here, that David may not be a real guy. So we're assuming that David is a real guy for the sake of this video.
Today's episode, I'm going to talk about my one problem with the film that comes up a lot in stories about David.
Only
but
one
first,
problem.
we need to talk about the film itself, which I would rank as good or even pretty good. Although I feel like someone in the production said, "Can we get the guy who did Prince of Egypt?" And someone told him, "No, but we can get his brother, and I hear he's just as good." Except he's not just as good. My 8-year-old
It looks like they got the guy who did Clash of Clans to animate
said
this.
the songs weren't very good, but I just call them forgettable. None of them had me cringing, but I don't really remember any of the songs except for the Shalom song that David sings to Saul, which better be good because it's supposed to illustrate God's gift of music to David. But overall, the songs were nothing to write home about. In contrast, I can still belt out "Look at Your Life Through Heaven's Eyes, na 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 na" from Prince of Egypt. Which, by the way, Samuel and David looks a bit like someone reskinned Jethro in Prince of Egypt. The animation style in David is very good, highlighting the character's features, but it also feels like a mashup of Disney's Encanto mixed with the blockiness of the characters in the 1960s marionette show Thunderbirds.
I agree with him. I don't think the animation on this looks very good. I think it looks like they got mobile game developers to do it.
And the story is structured well for a film about David, because you might be surprised that David's fight against Goliath happens midway through the film, and there's still a lot to cover after that. Which is a good time for me to talk about what I call the Goliath problem.
Okay. Now here's the real Goliath problem. The real Goliath problem is that there appear to be two different stories of somebody killing Goliath in the Bible. And one of them is David, and the other one is Elhanan. Now, that could be a problem. It could not be a problem either, right? It's possible that It is actually two references to the same thing, the same guy. It's just two different names. It could be the David one is earlier, and so it's more likely to be accurate. There are ways to harmonize that, but you can't get around the fact that there is a Goliath who is killed by two different people in the Bible, and we don't really know that one of them is real. So, also, Goliath, I'm sure he's going to talk about this. Goliath is alternatively translated as 9'6" and 6'6". And here is my thought, all right? On the one hand, if you're 5'6" on average, people who are 6'6" are kind of like giants to you. So that could be just, overly descriptive language. But the Bible says that Goliath was one of the sons of Anak, who was a giant and like one of the descendants of the sons of God and the daughters of men. We can pull it up actually, because it's something that I think a lot of people don't really know about, and like it's in the Bible. It's really cool. I don't know that it is in any way historic. I would say it is not historical. But so we've got the Nephilim, who are the sons of Anak. They went up to the Negev, came to Hebron, Sheshai, Talmai, the descendants of Anak. So that's the Anakim, right? Tall as the Anakim. Joshua came and cut him off. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of Israel, only in Gaza, in Gath. Goliath is from Gath and in Ashdod. So, we're going forward now to find Goliath. And there will be a few things. So 1 Samuel 17, this is the story that everybody knows of David and Goliath. Now the Philistines, a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits in a span. And there was again war with the Philistines, and Elhanan, the son of Jar Oregim, didn't pronounce that right, I'm sure, the Bethlehemite, struck down Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. Okay, so that's in 2 Samuel and in 1 Chronicles that Elhanan struck down. See, in 1 Chronicles, it's updated to struck down the brother of Goliath, whose spear was like a weaver's beam. I just want this chapter. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. So that's really specific, right? So here's what I have heard, specifically Dan McClellan, and I think Bart Ehrman both, but Dan McClellan I have specifically heard talk about this. It's very clearly talking about this specific Goliath, right? Because the phrase, the staff, the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, that's specific and repeated elsewhere, right? So that's part of the story. This Goliath had the spear, the shaft of which was as thick as a weaver's beam, which would be pretty thick. So that's referenced in both stories, both in 1 Samuel 17 and in 2 Samuel 21. where you have Elhanan. Now, did they just leave out the fact that he struck down the brother of Goliath? You know, it's possible. But it's the same Goliath as he's talking about in 1 Samuel, which is just curious. And this is the person, the redactor, who's putting together the books of the Chronicles, right? The Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. He's working this out. He's figuring out how to make these two things reconcile. Because this was David, and this is not David. But it's the same Goliath, right? So, anyway, all of that to say, the story of David and Goliath is also the story of Elhanan and Goliath, and who can say which one is true?
Trailers for David do a good job of hiding Goliath's face, because when he appeared, I nearly burst out laughing. He looked like a 12-foot tall, pasty Roman emperor due to his sharp facial features. My son also leaned over and asked me, "Dad, why is Goliath white, since everyone else in the film is Middle Eastern?" To which I wanted to say,
"Oh my God, Karen, you can't just ask people why they're white."
I was worried that the fight between David and Goliath would have a modern Marvel action pacing to it. Something where David uses his speed and agility to avoid Goliath's attacks and then bring him down with his sling. But I was pleasantly surprised that instead of this, the camera shows Goliath taunting the God of Israel, who he sees as a more worthy foe than David. As Goliath looks up and taunts Yahweh, the camera zooms out high into the sky away from Goliath and is...
Okay. I also do want to just stop here and talk a little bit about the conception of gods in the ancient Near East, in the Bronze Age. Gods were local. All gods were real. Henotheism and polytheism, or henotheism and monotheism, which eventually developed, or monolatry, some people would call it. Even in Christianity today, the Muslims would say that Christians are polytheistic because you have God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. Christians don't consider them all, they consider them all the same God, but three aspects or individual parts of the personality. But they would not say they're three separate gods, right? It's all one God, but he can be in pieces, basically. Muslims would consider that to be polytheism, right? There's only Allah. That's it. That's the only God is Allah, and there's no sons, there's no brothers, there's no wife, right? But in Bible times, kind of all gods were real. They just weren't as powerful as your God. But your God might not be powerful on the road, right? Think about it this sounds silly, but it really is. Effectively, what you have is a sports team. And your sports team is good at home, but the crowd doesn't really travel, and they're kind of crummy on the road, right? They lose even to teams that they are better than just because they're not as good on the road. That's what gods were like. Gods were powerful, and you could maybe have their favor or their assistance, but the God was powerful in the temple, right? When you are in the city center where that God is worshipped, who is the patron deity of that city, that's where he's strong. He's not so strong on the road, right? Because that's another God's territory. There's stuff about that also in the Bible about Israel being given to Yahweh as his specific property. Oh man, I don't know where it is. I'm just gonna have to move my glass. Okay. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly. Deuteronomy 32:9. Okay. Okay. So, okay. I don't. That's not what I want. I want this. And I want... See, I don't think it's going to let me do this in Greek. Well, maybe it will. I am not a Greek scholar, nor am I particularly good at Greek, but I know enough to be dangerous. That's the Koine. That's Greek New Testament. That's Hebrew. Which would actually be more useful, but I can't read that at all. I think there's a Greek one that we can use. These are all New Testaments. That's really annoying. Okay, well, I can't really show that here, but here we are talking about what I was looking for, okay? Remember the days of old, ask your father and he will show you, your elders it will tell you, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. This is Elohim. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. This word, the Lord's portion, is not the same as this word, okay? So in Deuteronomy, the conception of how Yahweh became the God of Israel is that the big God, El, divided up the world and gave Israel to Yahweh. Okay? And I'm saying Yahweh specifically because that's his name. So El gave Yahweh these people to be in charge of. Those are two different gods, right? And that is how they explained becoming the people of God. Look, Yahweh didn't even create these people. I don't actually know if I've heard Bart or Dan go farther with this, but like he found him in a desert land in Palestine, right? The Lord alone guided him. No foreign god was with him. I wonder if this is El or Yahweh. I can't tell, but the main point of this is this portion right here. That's what's really interesting. Is even in the Bible, it like effectively confirms that the God of Israel had a dad. Now let's go back to Trent.
His voice becomes quieter and quieter. The camera retreats and focuses on the midday sun hovering overhead, revealing...
Oh, I remember why I was talking about that. Your God is more powerful at home. That was what I
thing
was
that the
talking
God of Israel is infinitely bigger and more powerful than any supposed giant among men. The shot is then interrupted by David's sling, and Goliath is brought down. Though to keep the PG rating, they omit the part of the narrative where David cuts off Goliath's head. In fact, there are lots of thorny issues about the Amalekites and how Israel fought them that the film bypasses, which makes sense given its scope and target audience. So it's something I'll probably address in a future episode. Instead, my main problem with the film, and it's not a huge problem.
Wait, I mean, look, this man has multiple degrees. I'm sure he knows his Bible. But was Goliath freelancing? They were drawn up against the Philistines. So, what's he talking about? Because maybe I just don't understand who the Amalekites were. I don't think that was a synonym for the Philistines. It says south, so that wouldn't be Philistines. I mean, look, much of this story is not real. I'm quite comfortable saying that much of this story of David and Goliath is fiction. But I think Trent is wrong, unless he's talking about subsequent military campaigns, because Goliath was a Philistine and the Israelites were at war with the Philistines, not the Amalekites.
But it's an issue that always bothers me is how Goliath is portrayed. In children's animation, Goliath is often portrayed as a ridiculously large giant, maybe as big as a house. Goliath seems like he's 20 or 50 feet tall. Now, 1 Samuel 17:4 says Goliath's height was 6 cubits in a span, or almost 10 feet, which would make Goliath taller than any historically verified person.
True. A cubit is thought to be generally 18 inches. It is like measurements used to be a lot more relative. Like 18, your cubit might not be the same as my cubit because my arm is longer. But general consensus on what a general cubit is 18 inches. So 6 cubits is 6 times 1.5, right? So that's 9 feet. And then I think a span is 6 inches. So that's what I was always taught, was that Goliath was 9'6". There are also people who say he's closer to 6'6", is what that means. 9'6" is definitely taller than any recorded human, and would be a difficult height to live at, even with modern medical technology. I do wonder what his take on that is.
However, older manuscripts from the Septuagint, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Josephus say Goliath was 4 cubits in a span, or about 6'9".
See?
Which places Goliath's description within the known range of size for human beings.
And yeah, totally fine. If he was 6'9", he would be pretty big relative to your average Israelite. But that doesn't mean that this story is true either way.
The Bible also says Goliath's weapons were heavy, with a spearhead that weighed 15 pounds and armor that weighed about 120 pounds. That would mean Goliath may have resembled someone with a large, strong man build, someone like Hafthor Julius Bjornsson, who plays the Mountain on Game of Thrones, and is also 6'9" tall. Here he is lightly sparring with UFC fighter Conor McGregor, who himself is 5'9", but looks like a preteen in comparison to Bjornsson. And for a more shocking comparison, Bjornsson's wife is only 5'2" tall. In David's time, the
Right, so, okay, this is what I was saying.
average man in Israel was about 5'5" tall, so fighting a 6'9" Goliath would have seemed like a death sentence. But David may have been much taller than 5'5", because the Bible never says David was small.
it says that the armor didn't fit him. I am going to fucking make this point. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem. Blah, blah, blah. David was the youngest. David left the things in charge. Blah, blah, blah. Goliath is talking shit again. You are but a youth. Then Saul clothed David in his armor, put a helmet of bronze on his head, and clothed him with a coat of mail. Tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. I'm not sure. This is the ESV. I'm not sure what that specific translation is in other versions. Because maybe maybe I'm being tricked by my consumption of children's Christian media. But I feel like I learned that David didn't feel comfortable in the armor. That's not the one I wanted. That's the one I wanted. But I could be wrong. Tried walking around because he was not used to them. Okay, so it does seem to be just like a comfort thing, not a fit thing. So maybe he was a really tall, but he was scrawny, because they do not point out that he's a big, strong man, even though he's saying maybe David wasn't a little kid.
Samuel comes to anoint David. He thinks David's tall brother Eliab will be king. But God reminds Samuel not to judge as man does, because God sees what really matters. And when David is presented, all that's said is that he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome, not that David was a shrimp in comparison to his brothers.
And that the author wants to kiss him on the mouth.
After David petitions to fight Goliath, Saul tells David, "You are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." Notice Saul doesn't say David was too small to fight. And when Goliath taunts David, he basically calls him a pretty boy and mocks his lack of experience in proper weaponry.
Okay, so this is meaningless, really. There's it doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything if David was above average height or not. But I will just observe that what Trent is doing is saying, listen, it doesn't say he was small. It says that he was handsome. He had beautiful eyes you could get lost in, like deep crystal pools. He didn't say any of that. That's fine. But he didn't say he was little. And that's true. As far as I can tell, without reading the closest we have to an original version of that story in the original language, I don't think any of the descriptors of David are necessarily making out that he is small. But it is not making the other case. It's not making the case that he was bigger than his brothers, or almost as big as his brothers, but just not quite. Right? It's not giving you that. It is just telling you he was the youngest brother, and he was nice to look at.
His stature. Finally, when Saul offers David his own armor for the battle, David rejects it, not because it doesn't fit or is too big, but because David wasn't used to wearing armor like this. Now here's the kicker. Saul was kind of a giant in his own right. 1 Samuel 9:2 says that from his shoulders upward, Saul was taller than any of the people. And if David was much smaller than Saul, he would have given David another...
It is so dumb. It is so dumb that we still do this. We just vote for the tall guy. It is so consistent. It is remarkably consistent. And there's no good reason to do it. We just sort of trust the tall guy more. And I benefit from this being a tall person, but there is no moral quality associated with tallness. It's just not true. But for whatever reason, I mean, I would just probably say it makes sense to me that you think that the people who are bigger are more capable, and because in ancient times when you needed to go club people on heads, sometimes you needed a big guy who could go club their big guy on the head. I think there is still some of that left in our brains that we don't necessarily consciously recognize.
Another soldier's armor, not his own armor that would have been too big for David. 1 Samuel 21 also implies that David was strong enough to wield Goliath's sword as a weapon. Now, Saul said that shepherd David could not fight because he wasn't experienced in warfare. But you know who was experienced in warfare? Saul. Saul had loads of combat experience, since 1 Samuel 14:52 says, there was hard fighting against the Philistines all the days of Saul. In fact, Saul's mental decay and madness may have been related to post-traumatic stress disorder from the harshness of ancient warfare.
Interesting that he doesn't say it was because of a demon, which is what the Bible says. There's a lot. Saul carries a lot of the Bible. I don't want to go through it all. It's not worth it. But yeah, Saul said to have an evil spirit.
These details are important because most of us think of the story of David and Goliath as a story about David's success, and it is. But it's really a story about Saul's failure.
Right, and this is also one of the points of the David legend is justifying why the kingship didn't go to Jonathan. Because Saul had a son, and he and David were close, depending on who you ask, in ways that could be romantic or could have been just a very deep friendship that is not sexual. Those do exist among straight men. Many people assume that relationship was romantic between David and Jonathan. I am not qualified to make a conclusion. But what is true is that David was not related to Saul, but Jonathan was. So why is it that David will be the next king and not Jonathan? And so you have to do some retconning to make that story work. And so you have to show that Saul was a bad king and God removed his favor from Saul and gave it to David. And also later on, Jonathan makes a sort of symbolic gesture of adoption or transferring of his birthright to David. So David is the rightful king. So let's say you are a person who is writing after the fact, trying to justify why your warlord was chosen by God. You might say something like, God sent me to take over because you weren't doing it right. That is, in fact, something that we know other kings did, right? Like Cyrus. Sometimes you come into a city and you say, hey, I'm here to liberate you because your gods came to me and told me that your leaders weren't appropriately honoring them. So we're here to liberate you and bring back the respect and honor of your gods. And also now you owe us tribute. But mostly it was to because God called us here to help you. Right? They're spreading democracy. That's really how it went. And so why would you not revise how things really went to make your guy look more secure and more justified in being there, right? He has a right to the throne, not because he took it, but because God gave it to him.
gave Saul everything he needed to lead Israel, even the stature to fight the Philistines. The film does have a line referencing this when Saul's son Jonathan tells Saul he can take on any Philistine, but Goliath's cartoonish size obscures this detail. However, I appreciate that the film focuses a lot on Saul as the antagonist and how he fell from grace by pridefully thinking God had abandoned him when the opposite was true. As a result, Saul clung to his kingdom and tried to kill David in a paranoid fit of rage when he saw David as a threat to his power. And that's why we shouldn't...
Okay. You say paranoid fit of rage on one hand. On the other hand, Saul had anointed David as king. Now, chronologically, I'm not sure those two may have happened. The killing attempt before the anointing. But either way, Saul was very aware that David was a threat. Like, David was a threat. David was so much a threat that he became king. And Saul died on the battlefield. Again, how much of the story is true is hard to say. But God, Saul was right. He wasn't being paranoid. He was right. He was going to lose control of Israel, Judah, whichever he had, and David was going to take over. That was the correct assessment. It just he ended up losing.
Confuse animation with cartoons. When we treat stories from sacred scripture as cartoons, children can unintentionally categorize these stories with other cartoonish stories and treat them like fiction when they get older. But that doesn't mean, though, that biblical stories can't be created in mediums geared towards children from time.
I would respond to that with, that is correct. And it is appropriate to do so.
Time to time. The 2017 film The Star is basically the nativity story mixed with The Secret Life of Pets. It's a cartoon film, but for what it's trying to do, it doesn't disrespect the source material, and I show it to my children. The Prince of Egypt, on the other hand, is not a cartoon. It's an animated film. It's something children can appreciate, but it wasn't created only for children. Adults also love this film. That's why...
Oh, you nerd. Just say you like cartoons. It's an animated film. Yeah, it's a cartoon. It's fine. Doesn't matter. Madagascar was a cartoon. It was pretty good. I think this is an artificial hoity-toityness on art.
Why I usually pass on VeggieTales and prefer to show my kids Hanna-Barbera's The Greatest Adventure series. I mean, here's how VeggieTales describes the justification for Noah's flood.
Because the earth is going to be flooded, Shem.
Okay, but what?
God has seen that no one cares about doing what's right anymore. So he's gonna start over.
You really?
The ark will save...
Also, it is kind of crazy how we casually just skip over God's just gonna kill every living being on earth. That doesn't really come under loving so much.
Save us from the flood.
And here's how Hanna-Barbera does it.
So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence and corruption. Because of this, I am going to destroy both them and the earth. Thus, because wickedness abounded everywhere, mankind had condemned itself to extinction. In all the land, only Noah and his family were righteous.
When it comes to 2025's David, I would call this a good animated film. It's not Prince of Egypt, but it doesn't fall into cartoonish slapstick or ADD paced nonsense. It does a good job of discussing complex themes, such as the need to honor God above temporal goods like power, and to have faith in God even in our darkest hours. It also has some elements pointing towards Christ's fulfillment of the Davidic kingdom, which I won't spoil here, but are very good, because they're very subtle but powerful, though my 10-year-old son was able to spot them.
So, not that subtle.
As I said, it's not the most memorable film, but if you want a good film the whole family can enjoy, which is a rarity nowadays, then David is definitely worth it.
Damn, get their asses, Trent. there's no good family media anymore.
After the film,
But I won't watch VeggieTales.
my 5-year-old asked, "Dad, can we have David on our TV?" So I'd say that's a pretty good endorsement. And if you like more
If it's a movie made for 5-year-olds, I mean, look, 5-year-olds are great, but they're not characterized by their highbrow tastes.
recommendations on faithful films to watch, check out my previous episode on Christian films you should watch with non-Christians. And if you want to join us and over 30 other Catholic creators at our first conference, April 11th here in Dallas, then visit conferenceoftrent.com and get your tickets today because half of them have already been sold. And if you want to help us create more content like this, then please support us at trenthornpodcast.com. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you
Oh my god, I could get a mug. I could be part of the Council of Trent Mug Club. Unlike the Steven Crowder Mug Club, I'm sure. I mean, look, I picked this one because it really doesn't matter. This is not at all a controversial thing to talk about. Some of the stuff I said is not accepted by Christians because David needs to be real and, you know, God helped him and all that stuff. But there's no basis for believing it other than some of the things that the Bible has mentioned are like real places. That's true. There is some historical stuff in the Bible. There's very little to suggest that David was a real guy. We just don't have evidence of that. Doesn't mean he wasn't, but him being mentioned in the Bible is not enough proof that he was real. Anyway, that would not be a popular thing to say. But otherwise, I it's David and Goliath. It's a classic Bible story, and they made a movie about it. It's not a high stakes piece of coverage here, but it's always fun for me to go through these and just kind of see what these people think. But I think that'll do it. The sleep medication is beginning to kick in, and I must take myself to the bed. The new Wi-Fi adapter seems to be working primo. According to my OBS, I have dropped 0 frames in almost an hour, which is what I should have had this whole time. So the problem was not my internet. The problem was with whether I had an internal or an external adapter, I don't even know. But it just wasn't working. Okay. That's it. I will likely stream again tomorrow, now that I know that this works.